back in 2005, and that's a respiratory virus that spreads much more easily than this.
All right, so that was the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease,
Dr.
Fauci, that Dr. Siegel's been talking to, responding to concerns about a possible Ebola outbreak here in the U.S. Those fears are being raised now after a U.S. doctor infected with the virus was flown in from Africa, admitted to a hospital here in the U.S. in Atlanta for treatment. So this brings up the question, should I worry? Our weekly segment about everything that worries us. So how concerned should you be about this health crisis? Dr. Samadi, I want to ask you, here's a Twitter question, and we've been getting dozens upon dozens of these. Steve J. writes me, the people infected with Ebola were wearing protective equipment and contracted the virus. Why can't that happen here?
Well, because the kind of protection that they have over there is completely different than what we have over here. Our healthcare system is much, much better than what's going on in Nigeria and in West Africa. We have a way to put these patients almost in a bubble wrap where there won't be any kind of contamination. The reason why I don't want people to really panic, because this is not in air. This is not an aerosol. You have to be in contact with the body fluid, whether it's blood, urine, sputum, etc. That's the reason why the chance of getting this, healthcare providers, Julie, are at risk. But, you know, there's nobody out there walking around with Ebola because they're going to be extremely sick.
Dr. Siegel, Jim Osmond asks, how is Ebola spread? There are conflicting stories about this.
I don't think there's conflicting stories about this. Dr. Fauci, and I asked him, does this thing mutate? Has it changed? Because we talk about flu virus changing all the time, becoming more and more contagious. That's what everyone's worried about. He said the Ebola virus has been basically the same since 1976. It isn't changing. It's genetically stable. So you can only get it, Julie, by close contact to secretions. And usually it's diarrhea, by the way.
Is that why it spreads so easily, it seems, in West Africa?
Well, because of the practices in West Africa, Eric. They're taking, when someone dies, they wash the body. They don't separate themselves. They also are not understanding precautions. Dr. Frieden said to me, if you would just be able to isolate sick patients and take someone that's sick. Now, the reason that this is a huge problem in West Africa, according to Fauci, is because these are populated areas. Before, there have been several outbreaks of Ebola that have been controlled because they're rural. You're able to come in with a healthcare team and control them.
I think the hygiene and our water system and the way we live our life is a little different over here. Over there, if something gets into the water system and it can really spread out like a wildfire, they may not be really keeping like the kind of like hygienes, and they don't have soaps and water, etc. But I think like the reason that we don't have a vaccine yet is because you're talking about 2,300 people.
Right.
Now, on the other hand, this is hemorrhagic fever. You also have something in Nigeria and in West Africa called Lassa fever, L-A-S-S-A. Lassa fever is almost the same thing, but it can get in the air. And Julie, guess what? 300,000 people get the same symptoms as this one, and 5,000 people die as a result of that.
What's hemorrhagic fever?
Hemorrhagic fever is Ebola that we were talking about. You start with a fever, and then slowly you lose your appetite, diarrhea, vomiting, and then you start bleeding out, basically.
It's amazing that there's no vaccine.
There was a case of this, by the way, there was a case of this in Colorado in 2009 called Marburg fever. They isolated the guy who had it. It's almost the same as Ebola. They isolated him and he recovered. And there is a vaccine in the works for this, by the way.
Dr. Samadi, there's no vaccine for
There's nothing yet, but I think the whole purpose of this segment today, because we got hundreds of Twitters and emails, and I'll post it on my own Facebook summary of all of this, is people should not panic right now. CDC is all over this. This is not something that you can just get it from breathing. If somebody has it, we're going to contain them. All the hospitals are prepared for this. So it's time to be calm, and Emory, I'm sure they're doing an amazing job to make sure that our good doctor feels better.
There's a vaccine coming. It's been incredibly powerful in monkeys. It's starting in human trials next month at the NIH, according to Dr. Fauci.
Mark Davis tweets me, by the way, my fiance works for Emory. I was pretty worried, but feel much better now. They and the CDC are top notch. It's okay.
Well, that's another thing, that this is important, because if there are other patients at Emory, the hospital is making it very clear this is completely separate isolation. They're not using the same lab.
We got to pay the bills. We got to take a break, right?
Well, you know what? We certainly hope that Dr. Brantley and the nurses coming, Whitball, will, of course, recover completely. Our thoughts and prayers are with them, of course. And, of course, if you have a question for the doctors, you can tweet us or email us at housecall@foxnews.com, and they can answer the questions on the air as they